Welcome to the Johnny Dell Football Academy podcast on the channel that's trying to answer the whys and hows of the game by talking through and dissecting game film and diving deeper to explain why the X's zig and the O's zag. I am Adam Marino, joined by Mr. Johnny Dell, and we are reminding you, as always, the most fun way to watch is on YouTube, where we go live. There you can comment into the live show. Be sure to hit the notification bell and turn on your notifications so you can be a part of the conversation. We also stream live on Facebook and X. Also, the audio versions are always found on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, if you are live with us in the chat, it's probably because you are subscribed, you've hit the notification bell, and turned those notifications on. So, when sharing with your friends, be sure to let them know. We also love to hear from you outside of our live show. Email us at johnnydellsfootballacademy@gmail.com, and you can always check out the website jfa49.com, as it is the most fun way to support the channel. Also, the way we boost the chat and boost the algorithm is to type out hashtag.
What is up, Niner Faithful? Give me a quick mic check in the chat. Let me know that my mic is working. Adam Marino could not join us today. He is swamped with some work, but we had to go live. We told you on Monday that be ready. We did not expect the 49ers to make it out of the week without some major announcements and changes to the coaching staff. And sure enough, that ball has started to roll. So we are we're going to be talking about this. The 49ers, in the middle of the night, we got some news dropped. It was reported by Nick Wagner, and he was citing ESPN as saying that the 49ers were moving on from Brian Schneider, the special teams coordinator. And look, you know, I've been somebody, I don't root for people to lose their jobs and lose their livelihoods. Especially coaches, you know, and staff coaches, because we're not talking. I mean, are these people very well paid? Yes. Are they paid so well that you can get one coaching contract and never have to work the rest of your life? No. And it's people that have usually invested their entire lives into building a career and trying to climb as high as you can and keep advancing yourself. And there's only so many spots on NFL teams when you get into the position coaches and coordinator positions. And the pay scales are very, very steep in a lot of that. And it's a lot of hours. It's a lot of time without recognition. And so it is difficult to get to where they are. And people have been striving their entire lives. And to get there and then fail is not something I root for people. And I don't enjoy calling, you know, for people to be fired or anything, especially because there's a reason that players are paid 10, 20, 30 times what their position coaches and coordinators are paid. So, you know, I'm generally this goes on players kind of person. You look at the payrolls of an NFL team, and the entire payroll of 53 guys is, you know, $275 million. And the payroll of a coaching staff is usually going to be about $15 million for almost half as many people. So, you know, there's definitely, I tend to put it on players, but when there becomes a pattern of unpreparedness, of being out leveraged, of just not developing positions and players, and you continually suffer in areas, change has to happen. In the end, whether or not they're the highest paid person in the room, they are responsible for the performance of their units. Brian Schneider is responsible for the performance of the special teams unit, which was second to worst in the NFL. And maybe you could make an argument was the worst special teams unit in the NFL. And so I don't think it's a shock to any of us that the 49ers had cause to move on from Brian Schneider. I think there was the concern that because there has been cause for a little while, would Brian Schneider get another pass? And be brought back next year. And it was pretty quickly at the end of the season when you're looking at special teams, especially Kyle Shanahan's philosophy on special teams is I'm not looking for special teams to win me the game. I'm looking at them to not lose me the game. And special teams has been incredibly costly to the team for a while. If even you go back to the Super Bowl, the difference in that game was not even the missed block on Chris Jones in overtime. It wasn't some of the defensive busts in the second half. The big difference in the game was a muffed punt that went off Darrell Luter's foot and caused a turnover on special teams. It was a missed field goal by Jake Moody. Those things, a missed extra point by Jake Moody. That's a huge swing in that game that went to overtime. Up until that muff punt, the Chiefs had not gone the length of the field to score a touchdown. And that was they only did that once in the game. So the fact that you muff a punt at like the 25-yard line and then they score a touchdown 1 or 2 plays later, that changed the entire game. And that really is why the 49ers lost the Super Bowl. All the other reasons we look at, and Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, it comes down to special teams. And then this year, special teams lost the team several games, really torpedoed their season. When you look at the Rams game, for example, the team is heading to blowing them out, and you give up a fake punt because Chris Conley is not lined up correctly. That's a problem. You lose the Minnesota Vikings game because you have a punt blocked because you can't account for interior rush against a punt. You just leave a man unblocked. That is not acceptable. I get some struggles when your kicker gets hurt, and but at the same point, why was your kicker getting smashed on a kickoff return? You gave up a kickoff return for a touchdown early in the year. Just the special teams unit was so bad in so many ways. Change had to happen. Tying the defensive coordinator and special teams together, I've heard there's some rumors, there's some speculation that the 49ers could, because they've informed Nick Sorensen that he will not be the defensive coordinator. Now, they haven't exactly said they've fired him. He's obviously fired as defensive coordinator, but it could be relocating him. And there is talk that he could be moved to be the new special teams coordinator. He's done that job before. In 2021, he was a special teams coordinator, and his unit was pretty good. So if you're looking at, okay, maybe defensive coordinator was too much for him, and it was, it's a big jump going from a special teams coordinator position to a full defense, and there's a lot more plays you have to account for that. So I could see that. And I think they like Nick Sorensen. I really do think that people in the building like him. I mean, when you see him in the press conferences, he's a pretty calm guy, and he kind of comes off like Mr. Rogers a little bit, but he seems like a nice and likable guy in a lot of ways. And that, as far as we know, had a big part in him getting the defensive coordinator position. But you wonder about the dynamic. How's that going to be? If there's a week, next year's new defensive coordinator and where the defense really struggles, and, do some of the secondary guys, if they're not liking some of their assignments, start looking over at Nick and saying, I liked what Nick was having me do. And really, Nick, are they going to Nick instead of going to their position coach or their coordinator about things? And, so there's some dynamics that you have to be careful about, and they have to manage that. It's not impossible. I just wonder how that is going to be. How does Nick Sorensen feel about doing that, about having to watch somebody else do the job that he was told he wasn't good enough to do? And the trickle down effects of that. I just don't know. I'm not saying it's going to be bad or good or indifferent. I just wonder about how they navigate those dynamics. As far as defensive coordinator, yes, Nick Sorensen has been relieved as defensive coordinator. That I don't think any of us, again, it comes as a surprise. I think we were wondering, were the injuries and the avalanche of injuries and the Devondre Campbell situation going to be used as, why he should stay next year. And Kyle Shanahan made the decision, no, we need to have a change here. And I think it's, yes, injuries played a part, but when you start looking at the overall defense, it just was not anywhere close to the standard that San Francisco has had for a long time now, going back to 2019, really 2018. The defense in 2018 was better than the defense that it was this year. When you look at the defense this year, they were good in total yards. They were 8th in total yards, but they were 29th in scoring. They were 32nd in fourth quarter scoring. And the defense, again, when you look at special teams and defense and why the 49ers lost more games than they won, it really comes down to special teams and defense. Yes, there was a couple games here down the stretch where the offense did not pull their weight. But there was also a number of games where you needed the defense to just, make a stop in some point, or hold up in the most important points of the game. When you're up by 10 points in the fourth quarter, I'm sorry, your offense shouldn't have to score more points. You are up by 10 points. Your offense shouldn't have to. Now, should they? Yes, we expect that, but they shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to score, outscore a team by wide margins. And we look at games, even like the Cowboys game, the 49ers seem to have the game locked away with 7 minutes left, and with it being a 3-score game, and in seemingly the blink of an eye, it's a 6-point game. And the game is now down to the wire against a team that is picking 12th overall in the draft. We're picking 11th overall in the draft. And that has a lot to do with it. When you look at the Arizona games and the LA game, you're giving up 10-point leads. Like, your defense just becomes a sieve in this fourth quarter. And so they were 32nd in the league in fourth quarter scoring. They were 29th in scoring percentage. For me, I don't care as much. I mean, it tells you a little bit when you look at total yards. It tells you a little bit, but it doesn't always tell you how. I think the better metrics for how good a defense are going to be yards per play, first downs given up, scoring percentage, expected points by the defense. That one is really big because that kind of combines the takeaways, the scoring on defense, and how many points they've given up, and scoring percentage, all kind of wrapped into one. And I think those are really good metrics to see where you are as a defense. Total yards, you can end up just having teams are just running out the clock on you a lot at the end of the game and not really getting a lot of yards. They're just, they're good with 4 yards a rush and draining the clock. And so you can be a bad team and have a decent total yards, but you can also be a great team and have a good total yards. You can be a great team and have bad total yards. It's just, I think there's a lot more things that go in it. But when you look at this defense this year, they were 29th in scoring percentage. They were 18th in total rushing yards allowed, 20th in expected points by the defense. So that's that metric there. 20th in expected points by the defense. They were tied for 20th in takeaways at 17. They were 31st in rushing touchdowns, with a lot of rushing touchdowns given up. I believe it was the most rushing touchdowns of 49ers, because it was 24. I believe it was the most rushing touchdowns the 49ers have given up this century. It was a lot of rushing touchdowns. They were 30th in hurries per drop back. And that's another really important metric for how you are as far as your coverage and getting to the quarterback. Because you can be good in yards per attempt in passing, because teams are throwing it for 5 yards every play because you're just dropping deep, and you're allowing quarterbacks to get to their third and fourth read in the progression, and you're not pressuring the quarterback. So your yards per attempt in passing can look good, but you're not good against the pass. And so hurries per drop back really shows you how least productive your pass rush is. And being 30th in hurries per drop back is not a good metric. And that was something we all knew just kind of by watching the games. It's just far too often quarterbacks had time. You can be decent in sacks and be really bad in your pressure rate, because it's feast or famine. You can go 8 plays without doing anything, then you need a sack, and then you can go another 8 plays without pressuring the quarterback. And so you've gone 17 plays, you've only had 1 pressure and a sack, but you haven't been good. And you can do that through the entire game, come out of the game with 4 and 5 sacks, but you were not good against the pass. And so that's where we see that. It is 30th in hurries per dropback, just not good enough. Not the standard that the 49ers have. So where do they go from here? Who do we expect to come in? Now, there's been some reports. I can't remember who had it, but I saw it on X this morning that the 49ers are expected if Robert Saleh. So a little bit of a shocker. I did not expect Robert Saleh to get a head coaching interview this cycle. I figured it was going to be a while with the way that the Jets situation went down. But with Shad Khan and Trent Baalke doing the things the way that they're doing it, Robert Saleh is getting an interview with the Jaguars for their head coaching position. Looking at the names that they're bringing in, I don't expect him to be the first one on their list, especially when you consider they're probably looking to pair somebody with Trevor Lawrence. I think that's going to be the big thing they want to do is pair an offensive head coach with Trevor Lawrence again and really try and, bring his career back around, especially with the big investment that they made in him in his contract extension. So I see somebody like Kellen Moore, Joe Davis as more likely candidates. I think Ben Johnson, if I was Ben Johnson, I have a lot of options out there, and I'm steering clear of the Jaguars and Trent Baalke for everything that's there. I don't think there's going to be any interest from Ben Johnson in going to the Jaguars, but I've been wrong before. The idea, the report is that if Robert Saleh does not get the Jaguars job and he has no other head coaching interviews lined up, which they should know pretty much by the end of today, that the 49ers are expected to offer him the defensive coordinator position. I think he's first on their list and should be first on their list. There's something about when you have worked with somebody and that person can work with you and work with your staff. Obviously, we know that Steve, and just because Nick Sorensen has not worked out does not mean that firing Steve Wilks was the wrong move. Steve Wilks, for a number of different reasons, did not fit well, and it didn't fit well with the culture of San Francisco and with the staff, and that's fine. That's not a knock on Steve Wilks, and Kyle Shanahan said that when he announced that he was moving on, that this wasn't anything, a huge indictment against Steve Wilks. It just wasn't a great fit. Nick Sorensen, I believe, was promoted to the point of failure. Sometimes court companies and organizations will do that, is that you keep promoting somebody as they succeed at their job. And oftentimes we find out one promotion too late of where that person's failure point was. And that's what happened, I think, with Nick Sorensen. But when you look at Robert Saleh, we know Robert Saleh and his success that he's had in San Francisco. If we go back to 2019, they were 8th in scoring. They were 2nd in total yards, 2nd in yards per play, 8th in turnovers, 8th in rushing yards per attempt, 3rd in scoring percentage. Again, I like that metric more than even total yards. 3rd in expected points by the defense. That is one of my favorite metrics. Now, understand their expected points by the defense that year would have been number 1, I believe, in 4 out of the last 6 seasons. It wasn't that they were even not as good. That defense was phenomenal. They were only 3rd in expected points by the defense because the Patriots defense was so good that year. It's almost hard to really state how good that Patriots defense was. When you look at when they're 2nd and in different metrics and 3rd, the team that's ahead of them in all those metrics is the Patriots. That Patriots defense was ridiculous. Their expected points that year was something like 84 plus 84, 83, I think. And that would put you at number 1 in about 6 of the last 8 years. And that Patriots defense was at plus 153. Okay, we're at minus 24, I think, right now. That Patriots defense was ridiculous. So being 2nd in all those things is not, considering who was at the top there, and that was one of the best defenses of the century that year. It's not a bad thing. They were number 1 in hurry percentage, and yes, we all remember, they had a stacked defensive line. That was Nick Bosa and Dee Ford and DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead. But at the same point, D Ford did not play the last 4 or 5 games of the year. Now their points per game did shoot up big when that happened, but the defense overall was still very sound. They had a lot of good things going for them. They did, and it wasn't just D Ford at the end of the year that was getting hurt. Remember they had the back and forth of Akella Witherspoon and Emmanuel Mosley. Akella Witherspoon started the year out phenomenal, got hurt. Emmanuel Mosley came in, he played really well, then he got hurt, and then Akella Witherspoon went back out there and just fell off a cliff. And that had a lot to do with the fall off of the defense. If you remember back to the Saints game, Akella Witherspoon, I think, gave up 2 or 3 touchdowns that game against the Saints when they scored 42 points that game. So, that stuff kind of skews your defense a little bit. But even going to 2020, when the team had all the injuries, they were 17th in points, 5th in total yards, 4th in yards per play, 4th in passing yards given up, 7th in rushing yards given up, 5th in rushing touchdowns. Again, that has been a huge issue for San Francisco this year, was rushing touchdowns. And that 2020 defense, as decimated as they were by injuries, was still 5th in rushing touchdowns allowed. They were 13th in scoring percentage and 4th in expected points for the defense. Again, that's one of my more favorite metrics. I think that is a great metric there. And you see, even with all of those injuries, they went from 3rd in expected points in the league to 4th in expected points in the league in 2020. So he was still doing a phenomenal job with the defense that year, and then that parlayed into a head coaching gig for him. So I appreciate the vote of confidence for me as defensive coordinator. I think that would be a case of promoting somebody to the point of failure. I don't know if I would not be the guy there. But then when you also look at Robert Saleh going to the Jets, and this is going to tie into the other name that is out there, which is Jeff Ulbrich. If you remember, Jeff Ulbrich was a linebacker for us during the Mariucci years. I will always remember him. It was a Saints game. I think it was 2001. The team had 3 shutouts that year. I mean, that 2001 defense was a lot better than we remember, because they had some studs. Tony Parrish was there. Ahmad Plummer was playing lights. I think he had 7 or 8 picks that year, and Bryant Young was on the defensive line. You had Derek Smith playing really well as a linebacker, and Jeff Ulbrich was there. And so Jeff Ulbrich, I remember we're playing the Saints. They had Ricky Williams, all stud Ricky Williams. He ran off the left side, met Jeff Ulbrich in the hole, and Jeff Ulbrich forced a fumble. And so I'll remember that. And so he's a San Francisco guy, been here for a while, and then has parlayed into a good coaching career. And he's been the defense coordinator over there with the Jets, with Robert Saleh, has been calling plays the last couple of years, calling the defense. So people have asked, what has Jeff Ulbrich done? Well, he's been the defensive play caller there. He's running Saleh's system, and Saleh has a lot to do with installing the system. But as far as coordinating the coaching staff and calling the plays during the games, that a lot of that is on Jeff Ulbrich. And so when we look at the 2021 or 2023, New York Jets, this applies both with Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich. And we have to remember that 2023 Jets team did not have Aaron Rodgers there. They lost him in the 3rd play of the year, and their offense was abysmal last year. So when we look at their defensive statistics, we have to even remember that they did this in spite of one of the worst offenses the league has seen for the last 15 years. And we have to remember the Patriots game last year in 2023 against the Jets. There was something like 28 total punts in the game. Their offense punted the ball 14 times. It was 13 or 14 times that their offense punted the ball. They were that bad. But they were 12th in points allowed, 3rd in yards allowed, 2nd in yards per play, 2nd in first downs allowed, 2nd in passing yards allowed, 7th in passing touchdowns. They were 25th in against the run, But a lot of that, again, had to do with you could not, it was very, very difficult to throw the ball against that defense. They were so good against the pass, and they were so good in their rushes that teams were just, and it just kind of comes down to, again, when your offense is punting the ball 14 times, the other team can literally run it for 12 straight drives, have 36 rushes against you, and you're going to look not as good against the run. So it just kind of becomes one of those of when you see a number that jumps out like that. But they were 10th in yards per rush. So even though they were 25th in rushing, they were 10th in yards per rush. Again, that speaks to just teams were allowed so many rushing attempts against them. Tied for 11th in rushing touchdowns, 6th in scoring percentage, and 3rd in expected points by the defense. Again, those are the metrics that matter the most to me. 6th in scoring percentage and 3rd in expected points. They were a phenomenal defense while under an incredible amount of strain from an absolutely incompetent and abysmal offense. So I think the thing is they have to wait for the Jets to actually release Ulbrich from his contract. There is some speculation that the Jets are first gonna hire a head coach and then let the head coach make a decision on the coaching staff. So they're not going to let anybody out of their contracts until they hire a head coach and he decides what's going on. So I think that's another reason Robert Saleh needs to be your number one on the list, because he is actively available. Jeff Ulbrich is not yet. I think it would be an even more difficult dynamic to navigate in than the Nick Sorensen situation. If you have a guy who was a defensive coordinator with your team, he becomes the interim head coach, and you tell him this is kind of like your interview to maybe be the head coach, and things have gone as dysfunctional as they have in the building. And then you're going to hire a new guy, maybe even an old new guy in Rex Ryan, and then try and keep Jeff Ulbrich on and be your defensive coordinator. But now he's got to run somebody else's defensive system than the one he's been running there with Robert Saleh for a couple of years. So I would be surprised if Jeff Ulbrich stays in New York, but there's always the possibility. And so for me, number one on the list is Robert Saleh. Number two is Jeff Ulbrich. I think number three that makes sense, and people are going to groan a little bit, I can already hear it, but Gus Bradley. Gus Bradley was the defensive coordinator, if you remember, with the Seahawks during the original Legion of Boom days, back when the Seahawks and 49ers rivalry was really at its peak, between Harbaugh and Pete Carroll. That Gus Bradley was the guy who ran that defense. He was hired away to be a head coach, and that's when Dan Quinn came along. But Gus Bradley was the original runner of that defense, and that's where we have our roots, right? And Robert Saleh first grew up learning and running the system of Gus Bradley. So Gus Bradley was just fired by the Colts. They're not bringing him back. So he's available. So for me, just looking at the way Shanahan has done it, I've said, okay, we want to keep the same defensive system. We like the way we think that this is a very sound system. We've had an incredible amount of success here. When you look at 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, those are 4 really incredible years by defense. When you look at, again, scoring percentage, expected points by the defense, the 49ers in the top 3 of those metrics every one of those years. So, it's not a system problem. You have to then find the right fit to run the system. So, because I've seen people, we need to ditch the system, go outside the system. Shanahan needs to get out of the system. The problem is you've been trying to shoehorn people into running that system instead of people who this is their expertise point, is running and calling this system and coordinating in this system. So, that's why Gus Bradley, I think, is going to be third on that list. And his resume speaks for itself with the Legion of Boom and everything they've done that he did there, and familiarity with the system. For me, after that point, I think the next name on the list is going to be Dennis Allen. I think Dennis Allen has done a good job overall as a defensive coordinator, and you can tell that Shanahan has a lot of respect for defense, for the defenses that Dennis Allen has run. When you look at the job he did with the Saints, and I just look back to the last couple games we've had against the Saints. Those were tough games for San Francisco. That was, when you look at whose defenses that Shanahan has struggled the most against over the last 4 years, you're going to look at like Spagnuolo, Dennis Allen, Brandon Staley. It's going to be those guys that really you look at he has really given his offense fits. Those are guys that are going to be at the top of that list. And so I think Dennis Allen, just from the standpoint, much like Steve Wilkes was, that Shanahan, having gone against him, understood what he was able to bring to the table and how difficult he made life for you. It's going to be a similar situation with Dennis Allen. Now, the kicker with Dennis Allen, and why I think he's going to be fourth on the list and not up there, is that what Shanahan would have to understand and would have to be okay with is say, we're not going to keep the same system as it's been and ask Dennis Allen to come in and run our system. Dennis Allen's system is very similar, but he needs to say, you can come in and we're going to make a longer term commitment to you and start retooling the defense around what you want to do with your system. That's what they would need to do. So I think that's why he's fourth on the list. Otherwise, I think he could be ahead of Gus Bradley, but I think Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich are the clear number one and number two preferences on the list. But when we look at Dennis Allen, that their 2022 Saints defense, which understand that 2022 Saints defense, that they were dealing with a lot of cap problems. And so they did not necessarily have a really talented defense. That was a team that going into the season, in the offseason, they were $60 million over the salary cap. And so they had to let some talent walk out the door. They had to do a lot of things to try and navigate that problem, because they took it hard because of Drew Brees' retirement during COVID. So, but even with all of that, they were 6th in yards, 5th in yards per play, 30th in takeaways. So they weren't taking the ball away. But again, they were not exactly the most talented defense. They were 10th in first downs, 9th in scoring, 2nd against the pass. They were 24th against the run. But a lot of that, again, when you see a team that usually, what I look for is when a team is in both metrics at between 5th and 10th. If you're in there, that's a really, really, really good defense. A lot of times when you see a team 1st or 2nd in one metric, they're going to be poor in the other. Much like our 2019 defense, we were 2nd, I think, against the pass, and we were 17th against the run. So I don't see a big drop off like that, as one can cause the other. They were 19th in yards per rush, 11th in scoring percentage, 10th in expected points. So they were better third of the league in those, with a defense that was very devoid of a lot of talent and dealing with a lot of cap issues. 2023, similar situation. They're still, we're dealing with a lot of cap things. I think going into that offseason, they were $45 million over the salary cap that they had to then clear and navigate around. And so they let some players go, obviously, like Marcus Davenport and thing. So but that year they were 8th in scoring, 13th in yards, 3rd in first downs allowed, 10th against the pass, 22nd against the rush, 5th in rushing touchdowns. Though they didn't give up rushing touchdowns. That's a big thing. I mean, they were 5th in expected points by the defense. So again, that metric that I think really tells you a lot more is there. And again, dealing with some issues there. Now, I think that the next names on the list could be, I think they're equally tied for me, and I think should be on the list and should get a look. That's going to be Matt Eberflus and Lou Anarumo. I think people have kind of pushed back a lot against Lou Anarumo because of their numbers, and they haven't looked good on defense. Their defense has, Zach Taylor has stockpiled a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and they've been investing a lot trying to fix their offensive line, and they just haven't been able to do it for Joe Burrow. They've had a lot of injuries on their offensive line, and that's led to a lot of problems that they have. But their defense, they have like Trey Hendrickson, and that's about it as far as their defense. And so I think the biggest thing about Lou Anarumo that's at least really appealing for me is that he's always given Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes fits. That is a huge selling point to me. You're looking at this team of like we need to get somebody who can do well enough so we can get to the playoffs, get through the playoffs, and then somebody who could beat the Chiefs in the playoffs. Lou Anarumo's defense, famously in 2021 of the AFC Championship game, shut out Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes in the second half, and that's why the Bengals went to the Super Bowl that year, because they shut down Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in the second half. You look at the game they had against them this year, even though they were bad in so many different metrics along this year, they should have beat the Chiefs and held them to a good point total, save for a really questionable pass interference penalty right at the end of the game. So that's why Lou Anarumo is really attractive. And again, you look at guys that have given Kyle Shanahan some fits over the years. The last two times we played the Bengals, our offense has struggled against Lou Anarumo. So I think he does a lot of really good things. Just having watched the film, coverage wise and disguise wise, and with some of his pressure pass, I think he does a lot of good things there. I think Matt Eberflus again is another guy that has a decent resume behind him. He obviously got hired as the Bears head coach for a reason, and it was for his defensive prowess. The way that he turned around that Indianapolis Colts defense is really impressive. When they were a team that was 30th in the NFL in both scoring defense and total defense in 2016, or in 2017, excuse me. That's what the Colts defense was in 2017. They were not a good defense. They were giving up a lot of points per game at 25.2. They were giving up a lot of yards per game at 367.1. When you see both of those things and you're 30th, like, that's not good. You can be bad in one of those and be better in the other, but when you're bad in both of them, you're just a bad defense. Well, the next year after Eberflus took over, they were 10th in scoring defense and number 11 in total defense. So, they were giving up on average 4 points less per game. When you take a defense that is clearly not good and devoid of talent, and then you turn around that defense and get them up to 10th, that is a huge jump. And so that really speaks to what he can do there and who he is as a coach. So, it's that they were much more improved with very little in the cupboard. And so that's an attractive thing. So I think those are guys that all make sense. They're all 4-3 guys. So you're not looking at, okay, we have to now completely retool our front seven so that we are now a 3-4 defense. So in that sense, all of those guys make sense. I think every single one of them has a good resume and could do well. And really, with the talent that the 49ers do have, with guys like Fred Warner and Nick Bosa and Diamador Lenore, and how Renardo Green has looked, and Malik Mustafa, with the rise of Malik Mustafa and what he can do, you have the pieces for a really good defense. You have all pro caliber players at every level of the defense. So, and then you could I hope they bring Talanoa Hufanga back. We don't know what's going on with Dre Greenlaw. There's been some weird social media posts with the significant others of himself and Fred Warner. I think Dre Greenlaw goes out there and tests the market and sees if he's going to get a big payday, and the 49ers are willing to match anything that is reasonable. But they're not gonna give him a 4-year, $40 million contract. I don't think that's what it's going to be. And I think they're going to go see what he has out there. So in all of that, I think that that all of those guys make sense. I think guys like Anarumo, Eberflus, Dennis Allen, just because of you will have to retool some things. Those are the guys that are secondary on your list. But I think if I'm Kyle Shanahan, I am I've got an offer on the table to Robert Saleh to make him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the league, and a 4-year fully guaranteed contract of that. And I'm telling him, you know what you can do here. You know that you can be here for 3 years and rebuild your name, rebuild your legacy here, and parlay that into your next really good opportunity. And you will be able to choose the exact opportunity that you can take next. And you don't have to rush into something. You don't have to rush into another Woody Johnson situation. And I think coming off of the Woody Johnson situation, if I was Robert Saleh, I would steer 100 miles away from the Jacksonville Jaguars situation, because that screams you're going to go into just as dysfunctional an environment. So if I'm Robert Saleh, it's very attractive to go to San Francisco and say, you know what? I will wait it out for the next few years for a team that will be in a much better position to succeed in. I could wait out, see if the Buccaneers position is open in 2 or 3 years, see if the Steelers position is going to be open, see if what happens in Arizona, see what happens in a lot of different places, and just, if I'm Robert Saleh, San Francisco seems like a really attractive situation. So I hope that, maybe this time next week we're having a special show talking about Robert Saleh as the new defensive coordinator, or new old defensive coordinator of the 49ers. So throw it into the chat. Who is your vote out of that list? Out of Robert Saleh, Jeff Ulbrich, Gus Bradley, Dennis Allen, Matt Eberflus, Lou Anarumo. There's 6 options that I think are good options and would clearly be a big upgrade with what the 49ers have. I mean, you look at, if any 6 of those guys were our defensive coordinator this year, this team probably is in the playoffs. So that's where I think it is, that no matter what's happening here, I think Nick Sorensen was the worst defensive coordinator we've probably had since maybe ever. Just really thinking back through the different era. Maybe I'll take that back. Jim O'Neill was worse. That may be the only guy that I can think about that I felt the defense was worse. Jim O'Neill was horrible. That was an absolute debacle of a defense. If we remember back to that year, Jim O'Neill was here the year that Chip Kelly was here, and that Jim O'Neill defense was so bad. I mean, it was like 15 out of 16 games gave up 100-yard rusher. It was a franchise record for rushing yards given up on the season. It was a big reason that they went out and picked Solomon Thomas, because he was the number 1 graded run defender in the league. People always talk about him being number 3 overall in the pass rush productivity or lack thereof. But he was really picked because he was the premier run defender in college, and they were so bad against the run in 2016. So Jim O'Neill there was terrible as a defense coordinator. But I mean, you're looking at who else the 49ers had, because it's Steve Wilkes, DeMeco Ryans, Robert Saleh, Jim O'Neill, Eric Mangini, Vic Fangio, and then before that it was I'm totally blank. I just had it too. Greg Minuski was before him. And then de facto before that was Mike Nolan, because his first couple of years he was the guy running the defense. And then I'm fuzzy on who Dennis Erickson had as his defensive coordinator. Somebody will look it up and then put it in the chat at some point. I'll look that up. I'm going to put that on X, put the list of defensive coordinators the 49ers have had going back to like 1980. And we're going to see, I mean, definitely not better than George Seifert or Pete Carroll that we had at one point. Jim Mora was here. I believe that was during the Mariucci years that Jim Mora was here. And so I believe it was Jim Mora who ran that 2001 defense with Jim Mora Jr., not the playoffs, Jim Mora, but yeah. So really looking back through the last 40 years, uh, Nick Sorensen has to be the second worst, I think, defensive coordinator we've had. So it's really hard to go down from here. It's kind of like, there's only there's only one way you can look, and it's only looking up from here. So with that, stay tuned for more updates on this. There's a quick breakdown of some of the candidates that are out there. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to be coming back at you hopefully Friday morning, letting you know about it. If anything has changed, maybe we should reach out to Pete Carroll. I'm just saying, it's an option. It's there. The OG Legion of Boom defensive architect. There's some rumblings that maybe he's not fully satisfied with his forced upon retirement there in Seattle. So maybe that's an option. They gave Bill Belichick an open offer for a coaching position. Throw it out there to old Pete. See what you can have. If you can't beat him, then buy him. So, but thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and go Niners.